Welcome back to the channel. My name's Adam Smith, and inside this video series, we are diving headfirst into Primal Challenge number 2. If you want to find the actual challenge itself, which is released at the same time that this video will be going live, I'll have that information in the video description and pinned comment. Primal the Awakening is the game. It's created by Reggie Games, but this Primal Challenge number 2 is a community challenge that's sent out for everybody to try and tackle to see how well they did, and also be able to compare against their friends, family, and others online to see how well they can accomplish the goal. So inside this video, I'll be showing you my attempt, my very first attempt at this particular challenge. So without further ado, I'll show you the actual challenge itself printed out. Again, you can find all the information in a digital form through their storefront. All that information again in the video description and pinned comment. So here is a look at challenge number 2, and if you saw my coverage on challenge number 1, you'll be right at home here with how things are structured. If this is the very first time you're seeing one of these community challenges sent out by Reggie Games, then I'll go through this sheet with you. Essentially, we have the major monster we're going up against. This is going to be a sandstorm battle. This is challenge number 2, and we have some flavor text there just below. Then it gets into the aggression level. We've set ourselves for level number 1. I've done this for both the characters I'm controlling to go up against this monster, and also there's some special rules we'll take a look at in just a moment. I've already gone ahead and done the setup fully on the right hand side. At the very bottom you see the challenge score. If you actually get a victory, meaning we actually take this monster down to 0 health, we get a guaranteed 70 points, but there are some factors that can occur that can either increase or even decrease the amount of points we get. And then once we find out that total, we have a ranking system on the right hand side we can follow to find out exactly how well we did. But first, let's focus on what's going on inside the center of this, as we'll have to keep this in mind as we go through the challenge. So first off, it states, the winds shift without warning. Dygorax unleashes its wrath from the heavens upon the desert sands. Its storm tears through the hunters, scattering them apart. The dragon brings blood and isolation. Now, as I mentioned, we're playing with aggression level number 1, which is the default level. You can, if you want, bump things up by introducing nightmare cards to the scenario. Many of you experienced with the game will be familiar with this, but essentially makes the game a lot tougher. And if you do this, of course, it's going to give you extra points towards the end of the game if you happen to win. Special rules-wise, it says the sandstorm reshapes the desert. The dunes take on the form of massive golden beasts, trapping you between their scorching, grainy jaws. At the start of your turn, place a sand terrain in your sector. If there's already a sand terrain in your sector, you place a dust token instead. You can have a maximum of 2 dust tokens per sector. And then below it says, you are utterly alone in the desert. You cannot see your comrades, and their voices are swallowed by the wind. Players in a sector with a sand terrain cannot perform an assist, so we cannot use cards in order to benefit a character in a different area using that assist keyword. That's pretty unfortunate. As I mentioned moments ago, we get the monster's health down to 0, we get a guaranteed 70 points, and then we take a look through these to see if anything goes up or down in terms of that 70 points. We get 20 additional points if we keep at least 1 sector without any sand terrain in it, so we can certainly try to push for that. The other one is plus 20 points if you win by round 6, so basically cleaning things up before maybe the average play. And then here underneath it says plus 10 points if you win by round 7, so you have a fallback there to get some additional points if things go a little longer. And then plus 10 points if you use the Nightmare variant stance cards. I'm going to lose out on this right away because I am not going to dive into Nightmare. I want to see how far I can progress just at the standard difficulty, let alone Nightmare. But you can push that if you're an experienced player and really want to see how that operates. And then here, plus 5 points for each Nightmare behavior card you used. And then minus 5 points for each time a player has been KO'd. Minus 5 points for each time a player consumed one of those health potions. The monster for this challenge is all set up. We have the hardening track set at 0, which is the track underneath the health one. We'll talk more about that later on. Health is set to 10. We need to try to get that down to 0, as I've mentioned before. Behavior deck shuffled and drawn 3 cards across the center here. We have the attrition deck shuffled and ready to go. We have the stance cards here. We have the objective card, which is a permanent. We'll talk about what's on there in just a moment. And we have peril cards here. When the monster is in stance number 1, it's going to be 5, which is the toughness value, times the number of characters we're controlling, which is 2. So 10 damage is necessary just to get the wound track to knock down by 1. We need to get that wound track from 10 to 0. So it's going to take a whole bunch of damage here to be able to get there. And every single time we get to a specific wound value up top, it's going to change stances. So it's going to move to stance number 2. We'll flip a card. We're going to find out what changes in that moment. It states here, keyword resistant. We'll talk more about that later on. But below it says, at the start of the round, number 1 only, place a dust token in the front sector, and then the monster gains struggle tokens based on the number of characters -1. So it's going to be 1 struggle token. This is only going to be a one-time effect because it only happens in round 1. This right here is the objective card. It's a permanent. It has a red icon, which is an offensive icon. It says if you are in the rear sector, decrease the hardening level by 1. If you do, the monster gains 1 struggle. And last but not least, on the right-hand side, we have the peril cards. This one is a permanent. It says when a player suffers attrition damage, increase the hardening level by 1. Now, just to go back and touch on that resistant keyword and what it means, as you know, we're trying to accumulate 10 damage, 5 times 2 characters, so 10 damage just to get a single wound. Once we get 2 wounds and we're down to 8 health on the monster, it's going to change stances. So what this resistant is saying is basically if we do a whole bunch of damage, as per normal, it would carry over to the next stance card, but resistant means that any damage that's above and beyond is going to be lost. So that's unfortunately a hard stop with the damage when you move from stance 1 to 2. Here we have the terrain set up, the monster, our 2 hunters going up against that monster. You'll see the front sector of the monster is pretty clearly indicated by these lines right here and here. So basically the front is obviously where the head of the monster is, and that's where my 2 characters reside right now. There are some environmental effects around. How sand works, and we actually have 2 of those tokens in play. You can see on the left and right of the monster right now. If you're in a sector with sand and you try to move out, it's going to cost an additional stamina to do so. And we have a type of plant in the south and north sectors. At the end of a turn, if you're threatened, you suffer a damage per weapon level, and my weapon level is 1, so that'll be 1 damage. That covers the environmental effects, but don't forget about the 2 special rules from the challenge itself, which really tie themselves to sand. Again, I'll remind you of both of them. At the start of the turn, you place a sand terrain in your sector. If there's already sand terrain in your sector, you place a dust token instead. And the second one is players in a sector with a sand terrain cannot perform an assist. For this challenge, I've chosen to use Darien. So we have Darien here with his great sword, his spined helm, his red scale armor. We've got a nice gauntlet here. We have health potion. We have some other potions to allow us to get some extra damage or potentially suffer some damage to actually get increased damage for the rest of the round. And my second character is Thoreg. He's coming in with his hammer, his red scale helm, his thunder armor. He's got an explosive health potion and some other potions he can use as well. Both of these are set up for level 1 loadouts. If you want to find out exactly what I have for cards as well as loadouts, you'll find it all inside the base game rulebook. First thing we do is place the aggro token. We can choose whichever character we want here, and whoever does get the aggro token will be the first player in the near future as well. So we're just going to place that token here for now. Also, because we're going into a start of a new round, and it is round number 1, as it mentions right on the stance card for this monster, we place a dust token in the front sector, and this monster immediately gains some struggle. It's going to be based on the number of characters -1, which is 1 struggle. Now you're probably wondering what dust tokens are all about. It's a special token placed on the board as a result of some monster card abilities and game effects, which we saw in one happening right now. At the start of our attrition phase in the future, immediately take a disruption token for each dust in your sector. When you receive a disrupt token, place it on the defensive card in your sequence. That card does not count to your attrition check for this turn. Discard any disrupt tokens at the end of your attrition phase. At the end of a round, remove all the dust tokens from the board, and you can only have a maximum of 2 dust tokens per sector. So these things are going to hurt your defense big time. Start round effects are all resolved at this point. We don't have any more to do, and we move on to consuming a potion if we wish, and none of our characters are going to currently do that. So we now move to monster upkeep, which has to do with behavior refreshes and struggle. Normally at this point in time, the behavior refresh will discard the lowest valued behavior card in the row. So you take a look at the 3 that are here and you remove the lowest one. But because we are starting off in round number 1, we're not doing a behavior refresh, but we are doing a struggle as part of this monster upkeep. So the monster is going to gain struggle per player. We have 2 characters, I should say, in play. So that's 2 struggle on the monster. The monster is already halfway towards doing an unleash attack on us, and what an unleash is once the monster has 3 struggle tokens per character that you're controlling, which means we'd have to have 6 here, then it's going to go ahead and do the damage in the bottom right hand corner known as an unleash. So that's going to throw 1 damage to both of my characters. So we can actually try and control struggle based on cards we play and game effects. So we'll be trying to do this, and if we don't do it well, we'll be taking unleash hits. It's now time to get into the hunter's turns. So we start with the very first one. It's going to be Darian, as he is the first player marker and the aggro token to start things off. And the one thing to note is there is a start of turn effect triggering right now from the challenge, which means that because we're standing in this south section here and there's no sand token here, we're placing one at this point. So there are now 3 sand tokens in the 4 sectors, and if we actually can keep the northern sector forever getting sand during the play here, we get an additional 20 points on our score if we beat the boss. So something to keep in mind, but it might be challenging. At this point, I have to decide whether I want to move with Darian or not, and I'm going to move to this flank side of the monster right here in order to get out of an area with sand. It's going to cost me an additional stamina to do it, so I'm discarding 2 cards from hand for 1 stamina, which is normal movement, but an additional 1 thanks to being in an area with sand, so we can shuffle over. Next, I'm going to play Slash to the Flank, and I'm going to pay for it using this card from hand for 1 stamina, paying the cost in the top left-hand corner. It is a blue card. It allows me to remove a struggle, so we're going to reduce this down to 2. Blue maneuver cards are great for managing struggle. Let's now take a look at the effect here. It says Slash to the Flank. If you are in a flank sector, which I am, you can play a red card, an offensive one, as the next card in your sequence without paying its stamina cost. I've done this on purpose because it's a very high-cost card. So now we're doing our attack with the red offensive card here, Precise Strike. It's going to inflict vulnerable. We take a look at the weapon we're using. We're going to do 4 damage towards the monster, but get an additional 2 because the gauntlet states when you play a red card, if you paid with a maneuver card, which I used the maneuver card to pay for this one, reducing its cost all the way down to 0, we can increase the damage of the attack by 2. So instead of it being 4 damage, it ends up being 6. So Darian's attack lands 6 damage. We need 10 to get our first wound. Pretty good though, and we got the vulnerable token there. If we get another attack in the future, we choose to discard that token, it's going to double the amount of damage on the monster. So Thoreg is very much looking forward to using that, and of course if you don't use that in a given round, that goes away. So it's vulnerable for right now. Thoreg can take advantage of it on the next turn, so I thought it was a good time to put that on there. And at this point, I think the only other thing we need to do is a trigger, as the monster is going to react to the fact we played a red card in our sequence. So we're going to go ahead and find out what it does. This is called the Voice of Destruction. It says the active player is going to suffer damage, which would be the damage that's on the stance card in the bottom right, which is 1, unless they discard a yellow defensive card from their hand. I don't have any cards in hand because I went a little bit crazy this time around, so I am taking that 1 hit. Overall, a pretty successful turn for Darian. We're going to stop right there. Worth mentioning, we could potentially get our mastery going here. If we get 2 red cards in our sequence in a row, we can place a counter on this card. If we do it twice, we can flip this over and get an awesome benefit. Each character has one of these cards we can work towards unlocking as we play. And worth mentioning, I'm not going to get this right now, but if I had kept 2 or more cards in my hand, I would get a stamina token to use in the future. So that's a way to maybe not go as aggressively with all of your cards. Keep some back to gain a stamina token to make the next turn more beneficial. It's a strategy you can leverage. So we now move to the attrition phase. If I decided not to move whatsoever during the movement section of my turn, I would have gained a threatened token, and with that threatened token, it would have meant that during the attrition phase, I draw 2 cards and take the worst result of the 2. So that's not going to happen because I did move, which is good news. The other thing to keep in mind is the dust tokens, which are currently in play. Now, I moved to a sector where there isn't one, but if I had stayed where there was a dust token, at this point in time, for every dust token, I would take one of these tokens, basically blocking any defensive cards I've placed in my sequence. So say I had 1 defensive card in here going into the attrition check, I would have lost it thanks to this particular dust token. So at least for now, it doesn't matter because I burnt all my hands on the offensive side of the equation. We're drawing 1 card from here, and unless this is a 0, we're in big trouble. So Darian didn't have any defenses up to be able to block, so 1 is greater than 0 defense that I have, so 1 damage is going to be thrown against Darian. He's going to have a total of 2 on him, but there's something else going on here. The peril card says when a player suffers attrition damage, which just happened, you increase the hardening level by 1 for the monster. Might as well touch on the hardening track, which is attached to this monster. You'll see it's in level 1 right now. The monster's not currently hardened yet. It needs to get to level 3 to be able to get those benefits. Once it gets to level 3, a bunch of things happen. We basically don't get any carryover damage going forward. We cannot stun the monster. We cannot confuse it. We cannot inflict vulnerable. There's a number of bad things that happen. So we really want to try to keep that level away from 3 at all costs. We now move to end of turn, where we discard our sequence in the order played. We refill our hand back up to 5 cards, which is the standard amount. The monster is also going to turn towards the aggro player, which is still Darian, even though he had 2 cards which he played, which did not have the aggro red in the top right-hand corner. He started with that token, and so he's still the focus. And now we move over to Thoreg's turn. Now, taking a look at Thoreg's loadout, we have a really cool explosive right here we can use at the start. It says you may exhaust this card to deal 5 damage. If this inflicts a wound, confuse the monster. Great time to use this right now, because I've already got 6 damage on the monster. 5 more would put us to 11, and we can exchange 10 of that in for a wound hit, which means we can definitely confuse the monster. So Thoreg throws an explosive at the monster, and the monster is considered vulnerable. So instead of just throwing 5 damage at the monster, we're going to actually discard this vulnerable token to times the damage by 2, making it a total of 10 damage. And now we'll exchange 10 damage out to do a single wound to the monster. That was a great way to start things out. We got our first wound on it, and if we get one more wound, it's going to transition to stance number 2. The explosion has also caused the monster to be confused, and that's going to allow us to turn the monster whichever sector we want, but it is worth mentioning I missed something, and that was placing a dust token here at the start of Thoreg's turn, based on the monster facing this direction, and already having a sand token here, which it would normally place, but if it already has one there, it will place one of these tokens instead. So I've done that, no gameplay impact, but at this point we could turn the monster if we wish. I'm going to choose to have the monster stay facing exactly the same way it already is. Thoreg is going to choose not to move during this turn, so because of this, he's going to take a threatened token. I'm going to play a card in my sequence. It costs nothing for stamina. It is going to drag the aggro token over to him, though, so I'll place it on Thoreg. It's no longer on Darian. It says Disruption. When another player plays 2 red cards in their sequence, you may discard this card from your hand to stun the monster. I've got other plans as to how I plan to stun this monster. It's not going to be using this card or this effect, though. The red card's also going to generate an attack coming from the Skull Shock weapon, which is going to be 4 damage to the monster, which is awesome. We also place a counter on this weapon as it charges up. Once it gets to 3 tokens on this, it is going to go ahead and discard all those tokens in order to stun the monster. A nice power up. This ends up working out really well because we already have 6 damage on it, and I'm placing 4, which will be 10, which is another wound. Now you might be wondering about these behavior cards. Nothing else has triggered in the last little bit because we have not started a character in the front section yet of the monster because it has been turning, and luckily Thoreg did not start with the monster facing it. We also haven't been in the back section at the start of our turn of the monster yet, and we haven't played any yellow cards into our sequence yet. So it's kind of helpful on that front that we have not had those things happen, but the second wound has hit, but that is going to trigger stance number 2. We've now transitioned to stance number 2, and just like stance 1, you'll remember the resistant keyword that was on there? Well, the 4 damage I just did with Thoreg was exactly what I needed to be able to transition from one stance to the other without losing out on any overflow damage I might have done. So if I had done like an 8 damage attack there, nothing extra would have flowed over to stance number 2 because of the resistant keyword on the prior stance. The same keyword is showing up yet again on stance 2, which means that'll be a pain for us as we try to transition from stance 2 to 3. That's going to occur once we get a lot more wounds. We need to get down to 4 in order to transition one more time. And then you'll see in the bottom right hand corner the attack value for Unleash and other game effects for this monster has now gone up by 1. We also can't attack the front sector of the monster anymore. We have to work on the flanks and the rear only, so that's not fun. And on top of that, we're revealing some fire in the front sector. Well, that's certainly no good, and on top of everything I just mentioned already for stance number 2, we have a new peril card coming in, another permanent. Now, when you see the keyword permanent as we do with these other ones, it means when we transition from one stance to the next, the ones from the prior stances still stick around and take effect, which is unfortunate. So those 2 we were familiar with in terms of the peril and objective are still here, but we have a new peril. This one says at the start of a round, you're going to increase the hardening level by 1. So in other words, this monster is going to be putting a lot more effort into trying to get up to that hardened state at level 3, which is not good for us. Next, I'm going to go ahead and play another red card into my sequence, and you'll see this one's going to cost me 2 stamina. Doesn't matter about the aggro token because I already have it. And I'm going to be paying with this one, which provides 3 stamina, so easily paying for this knockout, which is great. And we get to stun the monster as well because we actually meet the criteria in the center here, which means we have to have 1 red card prior to this one in order to do so. 4 new damage on the monster. We need 10 more to get to that next wound. We also get to place another counter on the Skull Shock as it powers up thanks to another attack from the knockout. We also get to knock out the monster. As I mentioned, so we're going to place a token for knockout on one of the behavior cards of our choice. I'm going to choose to place a stun token on the front sector of the monster, thinking that, based on the fact it's going to be turning towards the aggro character consistently, is likely the one that's going to trigger first. After placing the stun token, you can now choose another character, can't be the one that actually did the stun, but another character to reveal cards to try and make attacks of weapon damage against the monster up to 2. So in other words, for however many red cards I have in my hand, up to 2, I get to inflict my weapon damage. So for Darian here, he's got 1 red card in hand, so it's going to be 4 damage. So that was a nice little jump. We now have 8 damage on the monster, working our way towards 14. Now I'm going to check to see if I get lucky here. I have the Red Scale Helm, which says as an action, during my action phase, I can discard the top card of our deck here, and if the card is a red card, I can add it to my hand. I have no desire to spend any more cards, because even if I try to get one of these defensive cards into my sequence, I know the fact that I have a dust token in my sector will just basically negate it immediately. So I'd rather keep 2 cards in my hand so I gain a stamina token to use for the next turn. Remember that strategy I was talking about from before. So we're going to do, for now, we'll do this action. We'll see what we get from the top. It was not, so we're going to discard this right here. So unfortunately this didn't work out. If I did get the red card, it would have been nice, because my hope was I could actually go ahead and do another red attack if I could actually pull it off, whether paying for it through cards or if it was free, and then be able to trigger this cool ability of getting rid of all the counters off this card and getting benefits from this through another stun, which would be pretty cool. So another stun can actually happen when you've already stunned the monster. You just put another stun token on a different behavior card, and then the other character still can use and reveal cards to do weapon damage. So I'm ending off my action phase. I'm keeping 2 cards in hand, which means because I have 2 or more cards, I've got that stamina token which I've placed on my dashboard. We're now going to the attrition phase with 0 defense. Now I've got a nasty situation here with Thoreg because he is threatened. We're going to be drawing 2 cards from the attrition deck, taking the worst of the 2. And if I take any damage, the actual hardening is going to increase by 1 yet again, which is not good. So let's see what we get off the top of the deck. 2 cards, we got a 2 and a 1. In either case, we'd be taking the 2. And that's not good because we don't have any defense. And so that is going to increase the hardness to level 2, which is not good. And we're going to take some attrition damage, which is 2 damage based on this right here. So I took the 2 damage, but I also noticed something I don't want to forget about, and that is when I stun the monster for my mastery here, I can actually go ahead and place a counter on this. 1 more counter, and I can actually flip that over and take advantage of it for Thoreg. Now, as part of end of turn, as I'm going ahead and discarding my sequence and drawing up my 5 new cards, I also have to look at the environment area that I'm in, and I'm inside a wild mall location, which has one of those plants, which means if I am threatened in that location at the end of my turn, I'm going to be taking weapon level damage, which in this case is going to be 1, so an additional damage to Thoreg, unfortunately. And the monster is also going to turn towards the aggro player, which is Thoreg, so he's now facing south. That's going to end off the very first round. So we're going to move the round tracker from round 1 in the top right-hand corner of the playmat down to round 2. Also, all dust tokens are going to disappear, and the fire token here is going to dwindle. In addition to all those tokens changing, 2 other ones are coming off the board from the monster. One was the Confused token, which is now removed, and also the Stun token sitting on the behavior card has also been removed. So unfortunately, the Stun token didn't prevent anything from happening because nothing has triggered across that dashboard in a bit, and that's a good thing. As we start a brand new round, we have to look for start round effects, and one we have which is new for stance number 2 says at the start of a round, increase the hardening level by 1. Well, my friends, this is bad news because this monster is now fully hardened. We're going to need to try to be able to use this objective right here, being that we need to use red cards offensively in the rear sector to decrease the hardening level by 1. We need to make that a focus. At this point, if my characters want to consume a potion, they can. I'm choosing not to, so we move now into the monster upkeep. So we take the lowest numbered card in the row, which is going to be the middle one there with the tail icon. It's getting removed and replaced. And what's coming in is an icon for maneuver. So we play one of those blue maneuver cards that is going to trigger a behavior. We now go ahead and gain the monster 2 struggle tokens. Again, its focus is trying to get itself up to 6 struggle to be able to unleash. And of course, there are also potential behavior cards that could actually be boosted using struggle tokens to make their behavior effects even worse. And now Darian is no longer the first player as it goes to the aggro player, which is Thoreg. At the start of Thoreg's turn, he starts in the front sector of the monster, which is going to trigger its behavior card. This card is called Burning Eye, and it says the monster is going to gain a struggle for each character, which is 2 struggle, and it says if it stance 3, then it's going to place a fire token in the front sector. Thank goodness it's not stance 3 right now, but 2 struggle will bring it to its total of 6 here, which means it's going to unleash and throw damage at us. So both of my hunters are taking 2 damage apiece, so Darian here jumped from 2 to 4, and over with Thoreg, he had 3, now he's at 5. We're going to probably have to start leaning on those health potions soon, as both of them only have so much health. Darian over here has 10 health based on the equipment he's got. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner, a 4 and a 6, and over here we have a 5 and a 6, so 11 on this side. There was 4 struggle tokens on the monster. The extra 2 got it to 6, which does the unleash, which just threw damage at our characters. But when the unleash happens, it resets back to 2, so we've done that. We've also discarded the behavior card it triggered, brought in a new one, and as you can see, we have a bunch of cards here with the same symbol. Now, last time one came in with that symbol, which was this one right here, I mentioned that it was for maneuver. It's actually for either red or blue cards because both of them have that symbol on them. It doesn't have any gameplay impact, didn't play anything incorrectly, just misspoke in terms of this one just having to do with maneuver cards. It can also have to do with these offensive combat cards as well. So one thing we found out is that our monster is now fully hardened, so each time we convert damage into wounds, we remove all damage the monster currently sustains. In other words, any excess damage is not retained, which is unfortunate. So we don't get any carryover damage going forward unless we can get this thing knocked down from level 3 to 2, 1, or 0. And also we can't stun it, confuse it, or inflict vulnerable. So there's lots of things here that we can no longer do. We have to work around to the backside of the monster in order to make an attack against it, and that will allow us to drop its hardening level. Now, a couple things happening here at the start of this turn. Also, the monster's looking at the front sector to see if there's any sand token there. If there is, instead it'll place a dust token. That's one of the special rules for the challenge. So a dust token has been set here. I'm going ahead right now with Thoreg and spending a stamina to get him moving, but he's going to have to spend an additional stamina because he's in a space with sand. I'm going to choose to discard this impressive strike card in order to get the extra stamina that will allow me to move into the position that I am on the flank. Also, by moving, my threatened token has now been removed, which is a good thing. I'm also placing this card into my sequence. I need to pay 1 in order to have that there. So I'm going to go ahead and discard this one right here to do so for 1 stamina. We've got this in for defense now, which is great. And in my current sector, there is no dust token. So this defense will actually mean something at the very end. Now, the kicker here is the second I play this in, it's considered a finisher. You can discard a strain token, but a finisher means that your action phase is now done. So as I'm holding on to 2 cards in my hand, I gain a stamina token. That's going to be end my turn. It's not an exciting one overall, but at this point in time, we're going to go to the attrition check. I at least have 1 defense this time, and I'm only drawing 1 attrition card. Let's go ahead and flip a card and see what we get. We have 1 defense and 2, which means that is going to have attrition damage coming at us. That is not good. So we're taking 2 damage, and on top of it, technically, hardening would go up by another level, but it's already maxed out at 3. So Thoreg takes another 2 damage, bringing him to 7 damage total, which is not good. His total health is 11, so he's getting close to being KO'd. Now, the thing I'm focusing on is hoping to see an attrition card up here in the future that's a 1, because if there is, then when we actually use these potions, with both of my characters have 1 of these each, when there's a 1 on top of the attrition deck, I can get 4 healing instead of 2, which would be massive right now because, well, there's more than enough damage on both of them to make that worthwhile. We now move into end of turn. We discard all cards in our sequence in the order played, refilled the hand back up to 5 cards, and the monster's now going to turn towards the aggro player, which you can see is still Thoreg. The monster now has a special rule where if there is a sand token already placed in the front sector at the start of a turn, which is now Darian's turn, then it will instead place a dust token, which is done. The kicker is that the monster has exposed its backside to us, which is one of the places we can actually hit it. However, we can't place any cards into our sequence because there is fire in this sector. Now, as much as it pains me to do this, I want to move to get out of that sector so I can place cards in my sequence. I really don't want to move to the north sector because I wanted to keep that clear so that sand didn't end up there, so we get that extra 20 points if we happen to survive through this. But I need to get out of a space that has these dust tokens because they're preventing my shields and defense from actually stopping any attrition check damage coming through, which is causing problems. So I'm going to go ahead and discard this card for 2 stamina to get me out of this space with sand to the north. Next up, I'm going to choose to discard this card right here called Voice of the Dragon for 1 stamina. That's going to allow me to pay to put Endurance into play. This is a defense, which is great. It's not going to trigger this one, so I'm good there. It doesn't trigger anything else up top, but it does provide me that defense to hopefully pass the first attrition test, because I don't think I've even passed one yet. The good thing I get out of this is I get to draw a card right away. If I had my Mastery completely flipped, I'd actually gain 2 cards instead, but 1 is good enough. Let's see what we get. We got Quick Attack, and it's a free one. Always like to see that. Next, I'm going to play my Quick Attack card. This one says when you discard this card from your hand, deal your base weapon damage. So this not going into my sequence does not trigger this up here at all, because it's being discarded, not played into my sequence. So we get 4 damage. Now this is where things get tricky, because I have 12 damage on this enemy, but remember, it's hardened. So if I do a really big time hit against it, even though it can get me a wound, any excess damage will not carry over, which is really bad, because I have a combination right now with Darian, which is insanely powerful, where I can make an attacking jump slice. I get to increase the damage by 3 if I use a blue card, which I have. I also, if I pay with a card like this icon, my gauntlet will increase that by 2 on top of it. And then you can even add another stamina in as well from my Dragon Claw to increase the damage again by 3. So you can really go absolutely nuts with that attack. I want to wait until we are going after the next wound to make sure I get as much damage to actually stick on the boss rather than get discarded. That hardening condition, or I should say the hardened condition that this monster has, is very painful. So I'm done my turn, got 2 cards still left in hand, so I get a stamina token. Another great benefit is the fact that the card I played in my sequence does not have the aggro red up in the top right, so the aggro token did not move over to Darian, meaning I can kind of take a backseat into the next round, go later, and be able to hopefully dole out a really big time hit, I hope. So right now we're going to move into the attrition step, and thankfully I'm in the north sector. I have nothing that's going to stop my defense. It's here. There is no dust tokens up there. Let's hope to see a 1 or a 0 here on the top of the deck. We got ourselves a 3. This game really wants to kill me. My friends, this is not looking good. The monster is having a field day with me, throwing tons of damage very quickly, even though I'm doing such a great job, at least I think so anyway, of managing these triggers from actually occurring. And just so you know, in my back pocket, I even have a card with Thorig he can use if one of these behavior cards does happen to trigger in the future. But unfortunately, just the attrition checks alone have been dismantling my team. Discarded my sequence, drawn up my cards. The monster's now going to turn towards the aggro player, but that's still Thorig, so it's not going to change direction whatsoever. We now move to end a round, which means all the dust tokens are gone. The fire has gone out in the sector on the left-hand side, which is good news. I've also moved the round counter down by 1, which is just off screen to the far right. Starter round effects are going to trigger, of course. We cannot continue pushing the hardening any further than it already is. It's already way too high in the first place. At this point, I can choose to have my hunters take a potion if they'd like, and as much as I'd love to give them both their health potions and just take 2 damage away, I'm going to hold out in hopes that the attrition deck will eventually have a 1 up here at the start of a round, so I can actually make the best use of those health potions and get 4 health back. Why? Because both of my characters are 4 damage away from being KO'd, so I got to keep a close eye on both of them. It's risky to keep pressing forward, but I do have other potions I could use. The problem is some of them, and actually most of them, the ones that I have here for my level 1 loadouts, will give me damage in order to either output more damage or draw more cards. So while good, they're not really great in this situation where things have been tight on me from the very beginning. Time for a monster refresh. Looking across the 3 cards, the lowest numbered card is right here. We're replacing that one with a brand new one. And the card that replaces it's actually a pretty nasty one. It's known as a trigger card. Essentially, it means if another behavior triggers, you also have to go ahead and resolve that trigger card afterwards. The monster's also going to increase his struggle up to 4 now, 2 away from another unleash. The first player marker is not going to change because the aggro player remained the same with Thorig, so he's going to start things off. And when we start things off, like we've done with all other turns, we're going to have a dust token showing up in the front sector of the monster because there's already a sand token there. Now, strategy-wise, it probably makes sense for me to head south, mainly because if I head south and I draw the attention of the monster, then I'll be able to expose the back side of it to Darian, who can potentially get some hits in to lower the level of the hardening situation going on, because we do not want to keep it at 3, so maybe we'll gun for that. We're going to go ahead and spend this stamina token right now. We're going to need 1 more to get out of that location with sand. Actually, instead of spending the stamina token, I'm going to go ahead and spend this one, which has 2 stamina attached to it, to be able to afford to move my character. Dygorax is now on the flank, and I'm going to place Heavy Smash in here. We're going to pay 2 stamina for this one, so we got 1 from the token. I'm also going to go ahead and use this one here for stamina in the bottom in order to pay for this, and it's going to allow me to do an attack. It has the aggro token, but I already got it, so no issues there. We get to remove a struggle. We could remove 3 if we had this mastered, which we do not. So 12 damage already here and 4 struggle. 1 struggle is being removed. We're going to add 4 damage from my weapon. And again, nothing is going to go past the 14 necessary to put a wound on, as this creature is hardened. What is going to happen though is a behavior card is going to trigger right in the middle. This behavior card is called Armoring, and it states you're going to spend 2 struggle tokens to increase the hardening level by 1. Now, it's already maxed out, so you might be thinking, well, nothing happens here. Well, the monster still spends the boost total anyway, even if it's already maxed out and it gets nothing out of it. It's also worth mentioning I did have a card in my back pocket I could have played if this behavior card was really nasty. It's this one right here. It says when a behavior card is revealed, you can discard this card from your hand to cancel the effects of that card. So if we happen to run into something and I still have that card, that is a very useful interrupt effect to use. This new behavior card has an icon for end of round. Also, as part of the attack here, I've increased the counter total for my Skull Shock, which is now sitting at 3, which means, based on what's written down here, once we do another attack in the future, and there's already 3 counters here, we remove the counters and we get to stun the creature. The reason that this is a good time that the stun didn't happen is because the creature is hardened and it can't be stunned right now. So hopefully we can get that attack on in the future when the opportunity is actually available to truly stun it. However, as much as I want to hold on to this behavior reveal card, I think I need to get my defenses up because I've been missing out on defending against attrition checks almost every single time. So we're going to go ahead right now and play this one into the fray. This one's going to cost 1 stamina, so I'll be using this right here to pay for it. And it's going to allow me to actually draw a card plus provide me with some defense, which is good. Let's see what we get off the top of the deck. We got another one. This one actually does provide defense, and this one's free. It says evasive action. Take a strain token unless your mastery is focused. We'd actually be taking a strain token right now if we place this. So why did I go ahead and push out all the cards from my hand and put them all into play? Well, that's because Thunder Armor down here, once you empty your hand, allows you to deal 3 damage. And on top of that, I really want to make sure we don't take any more damage from attrition. And I got very lucky and saw this one come in. It does force me to take a strain token, which means the next time I replenish my hand, instead of taking 5 by default, it's going to be 4 instead, and then this token will go away. Now, the reason this 3 damage is so important is because I know I have a massive attack coming from Darian, and I really want to make sure I have enough damage to get a full wound when he makes his attack, so this 3 should really help out. I got 2 defensive cards. We're going to do the attrition check now and see if we have enough. All right, here's hoping we don't take any more damage, and we got a 1, so we definitely defended against that. Took long enough, but we finally didn't take damage from the monster from an attrition check. At this point now we're going to discard all the cards in the sequence row. We're also going to go ahead and draw up. We're only drawing 4 cards, and this token will go away. So we're all squared away with Dygorax. The last thing I want to mention is the fact that this plan is not going to hurt me because I'm not currently threatened at the end of my turn. The monster also turns south to face the aggro character, which is currently Dygorax, and that's going to place a dust token at the start of Darian's turn because there's already a sand here. Now, this is a risky play, but I think it's worth it in order to try to get that hardened condition reduced in terms of level. So we're going to keep Darian exactly where he is in this north sector, which means he's taking a threatened token. I'm going to play my Jumping Slice card here. It's going to cost 1 stamina to do so. I'm going to be taking the aggro token from Dygorax, and this is a card that says if you paid with a blue one, which I'm going to do right now, so I'm going to pay with this blue card to discard in order to cover that stamina cost, but then I'm going to also increase the stamina cost payment by 1. Why am I doing this? Because I'm going to use the effect from my Dragon Claw, which states when you pay the stamina of a red card, you may increase that cost by 1, and if you do, increase the damage that attack deals by 3. So the card itself is going to generate 4 base damage from the sword. Also, by paying an additional stamina, it's 3 extra, so that's 7. Plus an additional 3 because I played with a blue card, a maneuver one, for an additional 3, so now it's up to 10. And then, because I actually paid with this card here, I'm able to increase the damage by 2. That's a total of 12 damage. So with 3 already on it, 12 additional is a total of 15. We need 14 to get a wound, so I've cashed 14 in, dropped it down by 1 wound, and you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, what about the harden? How do you still have that 1 damage there? Well, it states right here, when you play a red card in your sequence, this card, this objective says, if you are in the rear sector, decrease the hardening level by 1. If you do, then this monster is going to gain a struggle, which is going to gain right now. So in other words, it's no longer at 3. Now, the timing of this, I'm not 100% certain on, but based on how I understand this symbol here, basically when you play this in your sequence, you immediately get this effect, which says if you're in the rear sector, decrease the hardening. So I'd assume that the actual attack damage that's actually going against the enemy in this situation would not be at a level 3, it'd be at a level 2, and so because of this, I'm able to keep that extra damage. In order to avoid this from triggering, because I don't want to have 2 of these in my sequence, this will split it up nicely. Plus, give me some defense. This is going to cost 2 stamina to place, so I'll use this blue card here for 2 stamina, discarding it. This is going to allow me to not only gain something for defense against the attrition check, but also draw 2 right now. So let's find out what we get. And we got ourselves a counter strike. That's going to increase damage dealt by a previous card if the sequence actually lines properly. And then the next one off the top of the deck is going to be Aggressive Charge, a free one, which is nice. I'm going to play 1 more card in my sequence, mainly for the defensive reasoning. So we're going to have 2 defense against the attrition check now. In order to do this, we have to pay a stamina, which I've got covered by this one right here. So I've got 2 defense. I mainly want lots of defense because I am threatened, so I have to pull 2 cards off the top list and take the worst. It's going to hurt me because I got a funny feeling I'm not going to be able to have a 1 at the top of the discard pile, but we'll see what we get out of this pull. The first one is going to be a 1, so that is good. Let's see another 1. Come on. No, a 0, but technically you take the worst of the 2, so in this case you'd actually take the 1 based on the fact I'm threatened and I'm able to defend against it. That's going to do it. We have an attrition of 1 up in the top left-hand corner on the discard pile, which is great news for potions in the future here. We're going to definitely make use of. We're now going to go ahead with end of turn here and also clean up for end of round. Discard the sequence in order, refilled my hand back up. The monster turns to the aggro player, which is definitely Darian, and also when drawing back up to 5, I had to replenish my deck, so I take what's known as fatigue damage, which means I take an additional point of damage on Darian. Unfortunately, Darian's up in that north sector with one of those wild maws, which means because he's threatened, he's going to take an additional point of damage. He's now up to 8. At this point in time, I've also gotten rid of all of the other dust tokens in play and moved the round counter to round number 4. But actually, just before I go ahead and move that round counter, which I've already done technically, we're going to go ahead and resolve these behavior cards that trigger, because at end of round, this one triggers, and because this one triggers, this other one over here will as well. This one is nasty, and timing does matter. The behavior card would actually be resolved before dust tokens would have been removed for end of round, and it states on it, dust attack. Each player in a sector with a dust token suffers damage, and it looks like +1, so it's going to be 3 damage. Targeted players may discard a green card from their hand to half that damage. That is going to be Thoreg. He's the only one in a space with a dust token, which again was removed seconds ago, but it is there for the purposes of the effects of this card. So the bad news in this situation is there was a dust token in the south sector and this sector right here, so it does affect Thoreg as I mentioned. If I chose to go ahead and discard this green card, as it mentioned, I could have things, but having 3 damage and then rounding up means 2 damage, so I'm only getting rid of a card to save 1 damage, but to be completely honest, if I don't, it's going to be bad news. I'll be right on the brink of being taken out, so I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. We'll discard the green here to take just 2 damage. Then we have this next one called Dragonfire, because another behavior card triggered. This one goes as well. It says increase the hardening level by 1 and place a dust token in the front sector. Yikes. And then it's going to go ahead and use both the struggle that it currently has to place a fire terrain in the aggro player's sector. Players in that sector suffer burning. This was definitely a rough one. We have a fire in the same sector as Darian. We also have a dust token in there and the burn conditions on him. After resolving that final behavior card for end of round, we also had to shuffle up the behavior card deck and replenish the 1 spot. And when you do this, there's something called escalation. Because we had to reshuffle the deck for the monster, we get a struggle token placed on the monster. All right, so now we're all squared away. We move the round counter, although we've already done this, resolve any start of round abilities. And again, we only have one major one here, which is this, which would just have us upticking the level of hardening to the highest level, but that just happened as a result of behavior card anyway. We're already at the hardened state for the monster, which is not good. My heroes can now use potions, and we have an attrition card up there with a 1 on it or lower. And I actually forgot to mention that it could be a 1 or a 0 that we could use these potions to get 4 healing instead of 2. So I'm doing that right now for both of my characters. They're both consuming their potions, which again removes some points we would have gained if we hadn't have used them, but I want to keep myself going. So at this point, Darian has 4 damage and Thorek has 5 damage. So we're doing a little bit better after using those potions. And then, my friends, going to wrap up part number 1 of Primal the Awakening Challenge number 2 from Reggie Games. If you want to find information related to the challenge itself, you'll find a link in the pinned comment video description. You'll also find a link to the storefront for Primal the Awakening if this is your first time checking out the game and seeing it in action. Now, if you want to see even more content for the game, I've got previous plays on the channel in multiple capacities, so you can actually see lots of content there. But stay tuned to the channel as we dive into the finale to see whether I can pull out a victory in challenge number 2 in the near future. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what you've thought of this challenge so far and how you're doing with it. And as always, keep on rolling solo.